Hello friends, this is Navdeep Singh for hitbullseye.com. In our last lecture we have discussed about the pre-modern history. Today in our ancient history series we'll be discussing about the post-modern history. But we'll also be throwing some light upon the modern empire itself. The topics of discussion for today will be the modern empire, the post-modern empires, the Sangam period and also the Satavahanas. Talking about the modern empire. The sources of knowledge about the modern empire are those of Arthashastra, Indika and Mudraksha. Arthashastra and Indika are books, whereas Mudrakshara is a drama. We all know Arthashastra is a very famous piece of literature given by Kautilya. The origin of Mauryas is that from firstly the Vedic period and the lowest segment of the Vedic period, that was the Shudras, also from the Kshatriyas, and we also have evidences that the Mauryans derived their lineage from the Greek origins. The Mauryans or the Mauryan Empire evolved after the overthrow of the Nanda ruler or the Nanda dynasty. To be specific, the ruler was Dhanananda. The shining stars of the Mauryan Empire were basically three: Chandragupta Maurya, Bindusara, Chandragupta's son, and lastly Ashoka. Now talking a bit about Chandragupta and Bindusara. Chandragupta was the person who had started the Mauryan Empire. He expanded the empire by conquests, by treaties, and also by marriage alliances. Chandragupta was the first person to have a regular standing army. He had an army of about 6 lakh men which he conveniently used or deployed to run over the country. And also we have evidences that Megasthenes, he was sent as an ambassador to the Mauryan Empire in the court of Chandragupta Maurya. Talking about a bit about Bindusara. Bindusara was Chandragupta Maurya's son. He is called as Amitocrates by the Greeks. Both Chandragupta and Bindusara, both of them embraced Jainism. And it is also said that Bindusara conquered the land between the two seas. The land between the two seas meaning Arabian Sea on one hand and Bay of Bengal on the other. That is, the whole of the Indian peninsula was conquered by Bindusara. But here we also have an exception, that the region of Kalinga was not conquered by Bindusara. Kalinga is the present day Odisha. This land was not conquered by Bindusara. The shining example of Mauryan Empire is that of Ashoka. Now again, going on the same lines, the source of knowledge of Ashoka is that of Ashokan pillars. Ashoka had established various number of pillars, to be more specific about 39 pillars throughout the length and breadth of the country. And it was Ashoka who was chiefly responsible for establishing the solid foundation of the empire in the country. Talking about how he established the solid foundation of the empire in the country, it is mainly through a system of centralized administration. This centralized administration will be discussed in the next slide as well. Now while we were discussing about Bindusara, we discussed that he overran the land between the two seas except Kalinga. Ashoka's achievement was that he overran the land between the two seas including Kalinga or Odisha. So whole of the peninsular continent or the Deccan plateau was conquered by Ashoka the Great. Ashoka, being differentiated from Chandragupta and Bindusara, he embraced Buddhism against the Jainism being embraced by Chandragupta and Bindusara. In the previous slide, we had discussed that Ashoka laid the solid foundation of the country. How that was done was through a means of a centralized administration. Ashoka had a very elaborate system in which he had a provincial system, with 18 tirthas. The tirthas as a word meaning high officials or the ministers in his darbar, and 27 adhakshas, that is the officers of Ashoka or that of the Ashokan Empire. Ashoka's administration is popularly called as an equalitarian means of administration. Equalitarian meaning that he provided for all the citizens irrespective of their classes or religion equally, as well as he had the representatives of all religions and classes in his administration. So his administration was quite equalitarian in nature. Ashoka also had a very elaborate taxation system, and Ashoka's taxation system is the system where we come across taxation as a means of administration for the first time in ancient history. He provided for taxes such as Bhaga tax. Bhaga tax is the land revenue. He also had a tax called the Hiranya, Hiranya. Now these all taxes provided for a fixed revenue to the Ashokan Empire. Providing a fixed revenue to the Ashokan Empire was also a very good sign of a stable system of government, because before that the means of revenue of the empires was simply looting or loots of war. Now with this taxation system there was complete stabilization of revenue in the empire. Ashoka propounded the policy of Dhamma. Dhamma means the Buddhist policy. In our previous lecture we had discussed that Buddhist cult includes three things, of which Dhamma was one. Ashoka used his policy of Dhamma to eliminate social and sectarian conflicts. Ashoka also denounced private festivals and superstitious practices. This was again because he followed the policy of Dhamma. He believed that these practices or these festivals promoted differing opinions which would lead to sectarian conflicts, and hence he said that these will not be allowed in his empire. Ashoka emphasized on non-violence. Again, the practice of ahimsa, as we had discussed in Buddhism in our previous lecture. So this all shows how big an influence did Buddhist text and Buddhist literature and the Buddhist following had on Ashoka, and as a resultant of that on the Ashokan Empire or the Mauryan Empire. Talking a bit about what happened after the Mauryan Empire. The last Mauryan ruler was Brihadratha. He was killed by his general named Pushyamitra Shunga in 181-180 BC. And it was Pushyamitra Shunga who started the Shunga dynasty. So what the Shunga dynasty did was they continued the system of administrative reforms that Ashoka had brought in. Administrative reforms like the system of centralized administration, the system of taxation and standing army, all of that was continued by Shungas because it was believed that it was already a very efficient means of administration. The Pushyamitra Shunga was followed by Agnimitra. This guy Agnimitra had a taste in art and especially drama. The Shungas had to ward off many Greek invasions from the northwestern parts of the country, and because of those many invasions from the northwestern parts, there was a weakening of the Shunga Empire or the dynasty as a whole. Talking a bit about the Shakas. This is the second segment of the post-Mauryan period. The first we discussed, that was of the Shungas, second is the Shakas. These were people of Greek descent, and these were divided in India into 5 branches. The 5 branches being Afghanistan, Punjab, Mathura, Western India and Upper Deccan. Of the 5 branches, it was only the Western Indian branch that ruled for long, the other branches could not continue their means of administration for as long as the Western Indian branch did. The examples of the Shakya dynasty, we have that they indulged in sea-borne trade from Gujarat. Gujarat being a portal state or a sea state, it had a lot of ports in the Mauryan Empire, in the Shaka dynasty and also in the Shunga dynasty, and these people indulged in trade with other parts of the world through Gujarat ports. The Shakas were also the one who issued silver coins. Now, this thing we have to remember that there were very less number of dynasties or empires who issued coins of their own, but Shakas was one of them who issued silver coins. We also have to be careful because some dynasties or empires issued gold coins and some issued silver coins. Shaka was the one who issued silver coins. The most famous ruler of the Shaka dynasty was Rudra Daman, and he introduced his inscriptions in Sanskrit for the first time. We have to know that the inscriptions before the Shaka dynasty or Rudra Daman came into being, they were in the language of Prakrit. It was only Rudra Daman who introduced Sanskrit into the Indian system. So his contribution has been big. During the post-Mauryan periods, we also have evidences of schools of art called the Gandhara and the Mathura art. The Gandhara art is one which is having Greek influence, whereas the Mathura school of art is one that is having the Indian influence. Talking a bit about the Greek influence, these were mainly of grey color, whereas the Indian Mathura school was, the architecture of Indian school was mainly in red and white color. There were many differences between the Gandhara school of art and the Mathura school of art, which we associate with the post-Mauryan Shakas. That is about the post-Mauryan period. Talking a bit about the Sangam period. Now, Sangam period is the period or mainly the dynasties or empires associated with the southern parts of the country. There were mainly three dynasties, namely the Cholas in Tamil Nadu, the Cheras in Kerala, and the Pandyas in the southern tip area. The Pandyas can be differentiated from the Cholas because the Pandyas were lying much south than the Cholas. Pandyas had their capital at a place called Madurai. The biggest turning point about the Sangam period is that of Sangam literature. Now, the Sangam literature can be divided into two parts: narrative, which narrates the conditions of the period, and the didactic, which teaches about the right paths and the right principles that have to be followed by the people of the time. Talking a bit about Sangam poetry. Sangam poetry is divided into Agam and Puram. Now, Agam is mainly the love poetry, or it involved pieces of romanticism, whereas Puram was that of war poetry and it involved pieces of heroism to inspire people. Famous personalities who talked about or who contributed to the Sangam literature were Ilango Adigal and Satnar. These were two popular personalities, and questions about Ilango Adigal and Satnar have been quite on and off in our examination. The Sangam period is also associated with the flourishing trade with the Roman Empire, and as we all know, till the present date India and the present date South India, the trade has been majorly of cotton. This was the same in the Sangam period, that the main source of wealth was cotton trade with the other parts of the world, and more specifically the Roman Empire. Society in the Sangam period was highly dissected, with big differences between the higher and the lower classes, the rich and the poor. The higher and the lower classes were those involved in governmental or administrative activities, and the lower classes were those involved with the peasantry or means of agriculture or basic occupation. Talking about the Satavahanas. Now Satavahanas is also associated with southern parts of the country but a bit north of the Sangam period. These were the regions of Andhra and more specifically around the Godavari region. Now, source of knowledge about the Satvahana is the inscriptions belonging to the 1st century BC, and the founder of Satvahanas was Simuka. Even though the founder of Satvahanas was Simuka, but the most famous king was Gautamiputra. Now, as we had discussed about in the Sangam literature that it was a highly dissected society, the same was or similar was the case in the Satvahanas, that it was a highly Brahminized society, that all the means of administration, all the means of or powers of rule making were centered in the Brahmins. The king Gautamiputra had even made provisions for tax-free land grants for Brahmins. From this we come to know that it was a highly Brahminized society. They also show traces of matrilineal society. That means the king would take the name of the mother, and this indicates that women enjoyed a good status or an equal status in the society. Satavahanas, as with the period of after the period of Mauryans, also maintained a good administrative system, but again on the same lines of that of Mauryans. And this being centered around South India, till now we have discussed the Mauryans who were there in the northern parts of the country, the Cholas, the Sangams, the Satavahanas which were there in the southern parts of the country. This is all about the ancient history and the post-Mauryan period. In the next class we'll discuss about the medieval history, but for today the Satavahanas and the post-Mauryan history is enough. Thank you.